Hope you're all doing very well wherever you're watching from. So my goal in this video is to show you that you don't need to start out with a complex project when you're learning a new programming language or framework. So trying to think of a large project usually hinders you from proceeding to write code, and that's when you actually get stuck in tutorial hell. So I would like to give you a really simple introduction to Flask, which is a micro web framework. So let's take 1 minute to understand what some of those words actually mean. Micro means that Flask is lightweight, so it doesn't come with a huge ton of functionality inbuilt like other larger frameworks like Django or Spring. A web framework means Flask provides functionality that can be used in writing web applications and APIs. So my goal in this video is to show you a simple use case for Flask, explain how I like to set up my Flask development environment, also applicable to other Python projects, and explain the minimal syntax required to run the application. So before we get started, let me walk you through the little application we will develop in this video. This application implements a monitoring use case. So the scenario is this: you're like a server administrator and you don't want all your colleagues to have direct access to the server via SSH, but they still need to be able to access some system information from that server for monitoring purposes. So you're probably thinking, why go through all this trouble? So why not just give them access via SSH? Well, you could do that, but from a security perspective, the more people you have accessing the server directly, the more likely it is that someone will eventually leave a gap that can be exploited in terms of hacking, or someone could actually accidentally delete some important files, and then what do? So how do you go about exposing this system information to your colleagues without actually having them get direct access to the server? Well, what you could do is you could actually just write a Flask app in just a few lines of code and expose the system information to your colleagues via the web. So before we go through the code, I'm going to assume you understand a little bit about server-client architecture, especially in terms of web development APIs, and I'm going to assume you've written some basic Python code before. So let's get started. So to set up your environment, you're going to have to create a folder. I already created a folder called Flask Monitoring. The next thing you want to do, and actually if you go through that folder, I have a README file with some instructions on how you can actually run your application, and I have a requirements file with our dependency being Flask. So now we can go to that folder. So I already CD'd into that folder, and what we're going to do now is we are going to create a virtual environment, and yeah, so create a virtual environment, and we do that by doing Python 3, and we're going to create that virtual environment as such. So now what we need to do is we need to actually source into that environment, and we do that by doing source bin activate. So now we are sourced and we're in our folder. So the next thing we need to do is, as you can see, we already created our requirements.txt file. So what we need to do is we need to install our dependencies. So what we can do is we can do pip3. We can do pip3 install, and we can do the option R and requirements.txt, and this installs all the dependencies for Flask to actually work. So so now at this point we can go to Visual Studio Code. We can exit out of the requirements file. We could create a new file, and we're just going to call this main.py. So this is where all the main code is going to go. So you can name this this file anything, but you have to give it a .py extension to know it for so computer knows it's Python. So now I'm now gonna paste some code, and I'm gonna explain the code so it's easier to follow. So let me just do this real quick. Okay. So first thing we need to do, as seen in the code, is we need to import the necessary classes and functions from the Flask package. So we will also import the subprocess module, which comes with Python by default, and this allows us to run bash commands from our Python code. So on line 4, we instantiate our Flask app, and this is the most basic syntax, but there are other ways to instantiate the app and add more configurations. But we're we're actually looking at the easiest way to write this application as fast as possible. So we're just going to go with the simplest methods. So we're now ready to configure our endpoints, and I just want to reiterate that this video is trying to show you how you can get set up with Flask. So this is not about understanding the Unix slash Linux commands to actually get system information. So I'm not going to explain what the bash commands actually do in detail. So let's take a look at our first endpoint. So our first endpoint is the /top processes endpoint. So this endpoint is going to return 5 processes that are running on that server, on that computer, and this is returned by the ps aux command, which is that here. And we're going to use this subprocess function module to actually get that information. So this is the syntax for that. I'm not going to go into detail. Maybe that's for another video, or you can do some research on your own. So that's going to return some output, and we're just going to split it by end of line, and we're going to return the first 5. So after we do that, so what we're doing is we're creating that endpoint using the app.route decorator, and we're sending the path to that endpoint as the argument to that function. So this is the beauty of having a lightweight web framework, because we did very little to create that endpoint, and the framework behind the scenes is going to do all the necessary work to ensure that this function, get top processes, gets called when a user queries that endpoint. So the framework is also going to return a value to that client, and it's going to do all the work necessary to convert that to a HTTP compliant syntax. So it's going to do all the behind the scenes stuff. So what JSONify does is it's a function that's going to take a Python dictionary and convert it to a JSON string to be returned via HTTP to the client. So let's take a look at what the second endpoint does. The second endpoint does something quite similar, but now we're going to the logs path, and it's going to take in an additional subpath, and that's going to be an integer. So with this integer value, we're going to run the tail command, which is a bash command, to get the last few lines of a file. Now, as you can see from this, it's going to be the readme.md file. So again, I'm not going to explain the details of that, but in reality, this is going to be like a log file. This is going to be like a process output file. So you run the process, it outputs some data to a file, and you want to get some information from that. So this is a very simple example. It's not returning anything like that you do in real life, probably. So yeah. So we can go ahead and save that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to our console. And what we want to do now is we want to run our app. So the command for that is going to be flask. We're going to run the app. So main is referring to the name of the file that has the Flask app instantiated. So it's going to be the main, and we're going to run, and we're going to use the debug option. Now what the debug option allows you to do is it's going to restart our application every time we make changes to that file and we save that file. So we don't always have to stop and restart the app. So it's going to listen for changes, and it's going to restart the app when necessary. So we're going to run that app. So now we see our app is running. There's some information about this, but what we can look at is we can see like the debugger is active. And so let's go to our browser, and let's actually forgot to explain the last endpoint. The last endpoint is the default endpoint. So we're just going to localhost, and localhost is going to return this string. Welcome to your monitoring API. So I'm there. Hit enter, and we already see we get that output displayed to our browser. It took literally a few minutes to set that up. So if you had to do this in real time, like it will be just as fast. So what we can do now is let's go / and let's go top processes, and we see 5 processes running. Like I said, doesn't really make too much sense to do it like this. You probably have a more sophisticated query bash command to get some system metrics from your server or whatever you're doing. And let's just test out the other endpoint, which is going to be slash logs, and remember it has to take a integer at the end of that path. So we see this, and so this is all the stuff. This stuff is coming from the readme.md file that we created earlier. Now let's try putting some other stuff here. So you can see that because of this, because we configured this to only accept integers in that subpath. When we input a string or like a char, it's going to tell you it wasn't found. So that endpoint is not available for that configuration. So that's it. So let's do 3, see what it returns, and we see it returns even one more line compared to the previous output when we were on v2. So just like that, in a few minutes, you can create a lightweight web API to expose important information from your server. You can, of course, extend this app to include authentication, which would make more sense, so only certain people can get access to those endpoints. So although Flask is a micro web framework with limited functionality out of the box, there are several extensions already developed by the community to the framework, so you can use it for other use cases like authentication. You can actually configure like the server in a better way. Lots of stuff you can do with extensions, so you have to look into that if you want to consider developing your improving your knowledge in Flask. So that's the end of the video. I hope you learned a few things. So I want to encourage you guys to learn new things by building seemingly simple and maybe even naive projects, but that's actually how you learn, and that's how you get the courage to do more complex projects. Don't start out trying to create very complex projects, because then it just makes it harder for you to actually get to it. So start out with some simple stuff. This is very simple, like this application we just created today, very simple. But it's actually a realistic use case, because you could actually use this at your work. You might do something like this. So leave a like and subscribe if you found this helpful. Take care. See you next time. Bye.